Empathy has been called everything from a virtue to a weakness. But in an age of outrage, is empathy a liability, or is it the very thing we need to preserve civilization? Hello, friends. My name is Eric Cloward, and welcome to the Stoic Coffee Break. The Stoic Coffee Break is a weekly podcast where I take aspects of Stoicism and do my best to break them down to their most important points. I give my thoughts on Stoic philosophy and modern wisdom, and share my experiences, and hope that you can learn something from them, all within the space of a coffee break. This week's episode is called Evil is the Absence of Empathy. Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness. Seneca. So today I want to dive deeper into a topic that we've touched on before, empathy. Now, there's been a lot of instances online where prominent people complain that we shouldn't have empathy and that empathy is somehow the downfall of civilization. Now, when I first heard this, it sounded, completely outrageous. I mean, how can being kind and caring to others be something that is so dangerous? And I started to feel like I was living in an episode of The Black Mirror. So I did a little research to try and understand where this idea of empathy being bad was coming from, and in some cases even being called a sin. Specifically, this is empathy towards those that we disagree with, or even those whose actions we find reprehensible. Now, it's a challenging concept, but lately there's this growing sentiment that empathy has its limits, especially when extended to those who might exploit it. But before we delve into that, let's revisit what empathy truly means. So, empathy isn't about agreement or approval. It's about understanding. It's about seeing the world through someone else's eyes. And the Stoics had a term for this kind of understanding, oikeiosis, and it refers to the natural affection we feel towards others, starting from ourselves, extending outward to family, community, and eventually to all of humanity. And this concept underscores the belief of the interconnectedness of all people. So Marcus Aurelius, one of the prominent Stoic philosophers, reminded himself, men have come into being for one another, so either educate them or put up with them. Now, this isn't a call to be passive or just passive acceptance, but rather an acknowledgement that understanding others is a core part of our human nature. Empathy, properly understood, is a cognitive skill, and it's the ability to understand without being swept away. So let's address some of these critiques about empathy. Now, some people argue that empathy can be weaponized, leading us to support actions or beliefs that contradict our values. For instance, in a recent article titled Empathy Isn't a Sin, the author, Michael C. Rea, discusses concerns about untethered empathy, when our identification with others' emotions overwhelms our judgment. The article references Joe Rigney's book, The Sin of Empathy, where Rigney argues that excessive empathy can lead to moral compromise. Now, the main case that Rigney uses in the book is about parents dealing with LGBTQ children. Now, he posits that if the parents have empathy for their children, that their children are weaponizing empathy against them and are emotionally blackmailing them. So let's take a moment here and think about that and what he means by that. What he's saying is that if a parent decides that they want to care about their child and their child struggles with their sexuality and decides to support them and love them, that is somehow a bad thing. So let that sink in. Do you really think that that kind of empathy is a bad thing? That a parent should care for their child and the struggles that they have? And there's a great quote from Michael Rea in that article which really sums up what I want to express in this episode. He says, empathy is an exploit, in the computer hacker sense of the term. It's a backdoor through which people we have become hardened against might actually get through to us. Suppressing it makes it easier for us to remain hardened, to persist in taking advantage of them, abusing them, or oppressing them. And now, to be honest, what I see taking place is the people who argue against empathy are simply justifying their harmful behavior towards those they disagree with. This is because they might feel uncomfortable when they see the harm that they are actually causing to others, or they might possibly change their views or have to take responsibility for their actions. Remaining hard and closed is a protection mechanism for taking accountability for their own feelings and actions towards other people. I also see this as a justification for a worldview that everyone is out to manipulate you and screw you, so you have to be on your guard. And sure, there are people out there who try to emotionally manipulate you. But again, being empathetic helps you to understand where the other person is coming from, what their drives and desires are. In fact, I think that a lack of empathy leads to an inability to anticipate the behavior of those that we oppose. Being more empathetic actually makes you less vulnerable to being manipulated. Now, as a side note, I find it a bit ironic that some people who promote this idea of empathy as a bad thing really struggle when the roles are reversed. A good example of this is when Elon Musk talked about how empathy was the downfall of Western civilization. Only then, a few months later, when his companies were losing value and customers and people were protesting at his Tesla dealerships, he complained about how people were lacking empathy towards him. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't deserve empathy, but more that it proves my point that we all need empathy, and often when we might not even deserve it. The next thing I want to talk about as a kind of a case study on why empathy is so important is about the Nuremberg trials that happened after World War II. And this is to illustrate the dangers of an empathy deficit. Now, I know that Nazi comparisons are often overused, but they're so instructive of what happens to a society when they veer away from having empathy. So observers noted that many of the Nazis' officials displayed a chilling lack of empathy. So Captain G.M. Gilbert, who was an army psychologist during the trials, observed, "I told you once that I was searching for the nature of evil. I think I've come close to defining it, a lack of empathy. It's the one characteristic that connects all of the defendants, a genuine incapacity to feel with their fellow man. Evil, I think, is the absence of empathy." Now, this absence wasn't just a personal failing, but a societal one, reflecting a broader cultural desensitization. Hannah Arendt, who was reporting on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, introduced the concept of the banality of evil. And this highlighted that ordinary people can commit atrocious acts when they stop seeing others as human beings. I mean, these men could talk about mass murder the way someone might talk about organizing a filing cabinet. No emotion, no remorse, no recognition that the people that they had hurt were people. It wasn't about grand villainy or fiery hatred. It was about thoughtlessness, the failure to imagine the suffering of others. And that's what happens when empathy disappears. So Arendt also warned, the death of human empathy is one of the earliest and most telling signs of a culture about to fall into barbarism. Without empathy, societies risk declining into moral decay. So next I want to talk about justice, meaning how we treat other people. And justice is one of the core Stoic virtues. And our ability to understand and treat people fairly, even those we disagree with, is enhanced by empathy. When we let go of empathy, we become more reactive than responsive because we already assume that we know why somebody else does or says something. We dehumanize and flatten people into caricatures because we are unable to appreciate or understand the complexities of another person. A lack of empathy leads to more polarization and more conflict. Now, empathy is not passive. It's a radical act of imagination that can make justice more informed, not less. So the Stoics were emphatic about the fact that we all belong to the same human family, with the idea of cosmopolitanism, and that we need to look out for each other and work towards the common good. Seneca, in his book On Anger, wrote, "We are members of one great body, planted by nature. We must consider that we were born for the good of the whole," meaning that we have a duty to help each other and to consider the needs and suffering of others, not just our own self-interests. Part of what makes humanity thrive is our ability to work together for the common good. Personally, I like living in a world where people are empathetic and care about other people. As an example from my own life, when I was 10 years old, it was summer, and my brother and I were out riding our bikes like we always did. And I came around a corner, and I hit some water on the road, and my bike slipped out from under me, and I went down hard, and I broke my arm. We were about 2 miles from home and weren't sure how to get there because this was long before cell phones. And just then, a couple pulled up in a car to see if we were okay. They took one look at my arm and quickly loaded us into their car and brought our bikes as well and took us home. And to this day, I'm grateful that some random strangers were empathetic enough to help me in a time of need. So where does this leave us? While it's true that empathy involves risk, it's essential to differentiate between empathy and blind agreement. Empathy allows us to understand another's perspective without necessarily endorsing it. This distinction is crucial in maintaining our moral compass while engaging compassionately with others. And empathy also doesn't mean that we abandon our principles or excuse harmful behavior. Instead, it equips us to address issues more effectively. By understanding the motivations and emotions of others, we can craft responses that are both compassionate and firm. As Seneca wrote, it is equally faulty to trust everyone as it is to trust no one. We need to practice discernment, which is key to empathy, not blind emotion, but thoughtful, balanced understanding. It's about being in tune with our emotions and the emotions of others and using our rationality to make wise assessments. And this balanced approach helps you to navigate the world with an open heart and a clear mind. And I'll be honest though, practicing this kind of empathy isn't always easy. There's been times when I've struggled to understand perspectives that clash with my own deeply held beliefs. But in those moments, I found that striving for empathy doesn't weaken my convictions. It actually strengthens them by grounding them in a deeper understanding of our shared humanity. Empathy doesn't mean surrendering our values. It means understanding the world clearly enough to fight for them. And in an age of outrage, maybe what we need is not less empathy, but a deeper, stronger, more courageous kind of empathy. And that's the end of this week's Stoic Coffee Break. As always, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and thanks for listening. Also, just want to let you know that my book, Stoicism 101, is available. You can find more information about that at my website on stoic.coffee. If this episode resonated with you or challenged you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can leave a comment if you're listening to this on Spotify. Thanks again for listening.